Good evening. Welcome to the September 10th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. Welcome this evening. We're glad you're here with us. For those in attendance, there are copies of the agenda on either side of the room. For those following at home, go to our website, downers.us. There's a link in the lower left-hand corner to this week's meetings where all the same materials will be available to you there. To begin the meeting, let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
April, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Commissioner Gray?
Here.
Commissioner Culvaney?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Mayor Barnett?
Here. Takes us to item 3 on our agenda, minutes of previous council meetings. Is there a motion to approve such minutes?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the minutes as presented.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We are flying through this meeting. Item 4 on our agenda tonight is public comments. We have a couple of opportunities. We have a couple opportunities in the meeting for public comments. The first section right now is for anybody who would like to discuss an item that is not on tonight's agenda. As we get to each agenda item, there will be additional opportunities to comment on those specific items. So is there anyone with a subject not on tonight's agenda?
So much for flying through the meeting. I have 2 opportunities to comment tonight. The first, I'd like to invite everyone on the Village Council on Thursday, October 3rd of this year from 5 to 7 p.m. at Oak Trace, which is one of the major senior living centers in our township. We're having our second annual Oktoberfest fundraiser that's sponsored by the Friends for Downers Grove Township Seniors, which is a 501c3 that's dedicated to raising funds for senior services and human services in the township. There will be raffle opportunities. It's a measly $25 at the door. We've got some great baskets that Lorraine, our township treasurer, and Karen Kelly, one of our trustees, have worked hard to put together, and I'd be delighted to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments not on tonight's agenda? Please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Topic. Our family has lived in the Orchard Brook neighborhood for the last 10 years. Earlier this year, we learned that there are substantial state and federal tax incentives for the installation of solar panels. We obtained several quotes that would essentially provide all of our energy needs and pay for itself in less than 5 years, with 2/3 of the total cost coming back to us in incentives. When we went through the village permitting process, however, our application was rejected. We were told that we would need to cut the system in half because our property had been rezoned since it was built, and as a result, half the panels would encroach toward the street by less than 4 feet. We were also told that we were not eligible for a hardship variance and that the building department would not support one. We were told that absent a change to the ordinance, we would not be able to build our full system, but only a partial system with essentially half of the capacity of the original system. Because our home faces south, panels on the rear roof are not a viable option. We are asking the council to amend the zoning ordinance to allow roof-mounted solar panels to encroach when placed on a legally encroaching building. This would allow my home and others like it to enjoy the full benefits of solar and reduce our home's carbon footprint to close to zero. I'm providing slides prepared by our contractor showing the substantial difference in energy costs and carbon dioxide emissions under the original plan and under the village's requirements, along with a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance that would allow for a system like ours. Because available incentives are limited and will be reduced in 2020, we ask that you promptly consider this change. My contact information is included in the packet that I am providing to you. I thank you for your consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on subjects not on tonight's agenda? Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Takes us to our active agenda this evening. A little note about our active agenda. These are items which typically have been workshopped in a prior meeting. Council will make a motion bringing a subject to a discussion point, at which point we'll take input from the audience, allowing the council to hear that before we get to making any agenda or any active decisions tonight. Active agenda items typically are placed in with the intention of being voted on this evening. Is there a motion for ordinance 2019-8304?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council adopt an ordinance amending raffle license provisions as presented.
Second.
Is there any council comment or audience comments or questions on this agenda item? Okay, council questions, comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Gray?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, motion passes unanimously. Is there a motion for motion 2019-8311?
Mayor Barnett, I move that the council direct staff to prepare amendments to the zoning ordinance for Plan Commission review and consideration at a public hearing to include the following. Categorize cannabis dispensaries as a special use in the B2, B3, ORM, M1, and M2 zoning districts. Categorize all other cannabis businesses as a special use in the ORM, M1, and M2 zoning districts. Other regulations for cannabis businesses, not adjacent to residentially zoned properties, must be located 1,000 feet or 1,300 feet from schools, parks, and daycares, with the Plan Commission to discuss these distance regulation options. The dispensary must not be located within 1,500 feet of another dispensary, and a maximum of 3 special use permits for all cannabis businesses shall be issued.
Second.
Okay, are there any audience comments or questions on this agenda item this evening? Okay, council questions, comments? Leslie?
First, I again want to thank Stan Popovich and Chief Gillette for their sharing their time and expertise last week. We say it a lot, but we really do have some of the best staff in this village. Second, I just want to thank all of the residents who emailed us regarding this issue. I received probably almost 100 emails on this topic, and the count broke out to about 68 for and 16 against, sending a request to the Plan Commission to explore the 2 options. I also want to remind everyone again, as I did receive some emails with the misunderstanding that despite what we decide to do today, retail cannabis will be legal throughout the state of Illinois on January 1st, 2020. Based on the research that was provided to me and on the research that I have done on my own time, feedback from the village staff and police department last week, as well as resident feedback, I plan to vote yes to send a request to the Plan Commission. Last week, we all sat up here and vowed to listen to the residents and take in all the information, and I plan on doing that with my vote. Mayor Barnett was correct in stating that this tax revenue would not be a panacea for our declining sales tax revenue, nor our need to continue to fund pensions. However, I believe that we need to ensure we are exploring every avenue for new revenue to ensure that our residents, including seniors and others on fixed incomes, are not unduly burdened by tax increases. This vote is not a vote to zone, as a reminder, but simply a vote to allow the Plan Commission to use their expertise and to elicit more public comment to provide the council with a recommendation. I cannot imagine ever voting not to gather more information on a topic when we have the available time to do so. So I plan to vote yes to send these amendments to the zoning ordinance to the Plan Commission.
Thank you. Additional? Right?
Thank you, Mayor. I won't repeat what's already been said, especially when it's been said so well, other than to say that I agree that we should gather more information, and the way to do that is through the Plan Commission. Much has been said about the topic of sales tax revenue coming from it, and efforts have been made in order to try to minimize that. But I think if you put it in context, you start to see a little bit different, see it in a different light. I want to thank staff for the answer to my council question here with regard to the per square foot impact. Staff estimates that dispensaries will be 2,000 to 4,000 square feet in area and generate $7 to $10 million in annual sales. That's a range of $1,750 to $5,000 per square foot in annual sales, where a typical retail store generates about $350 per square foot in retail sales. So what does that look like in the village of Downers Grove? One of the downside estimates in terms of sales tax revenue was about $150,000. That is exactly the revenue that was expected to be generated by the opening of Art Van on an annual basis. The Art Van store is about 100,000 square feet versus a 2,000 to 4,000 square foot dispensary. On the upside, we were looking at about $500,000 in annual sales tax revenue, according to some projections. That's just a little more than Packy Webb was expected to generate through its sales tax agreement, which was $7.3 million over 15 years, or about $487,000 a year. The dollars are real, and the dollars would assist in budgeting, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. Thank you, Mayor.
Additional comments, questions from council? Anyone? Okay, we'll take a minute and see if there's any additional comments from the... Yeah. Okay, go ahead and please approach the podium. That allows everybody here and on TV.
Hi, my name is Zach Alexander. I live in Downers Grove, and I prepared some comments based on my research of how dispensaries would affect Downers Grove in order to address some concerns I've heard regarding legalization and sales in the town. I've been concerned about crime. According to the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, 11 counties in Seattle saw a 15 to 30% reduction in rapes and a 10 to 20% reduction in theft compared to 10 near-identical counties in Oregon. According to the Economic Journal, border state counties where marijuana is legal saw a 10% reduction in murders, 9% reduction in assaults, and a 41% reduction in drug-related murders. If you're worried about traffic accidents, according to the Economic Inquiry and the American Journal for Public Health, there are no long-term increases in traffic accidents, and only one study saw an uptick in accidents for a single year for counties that legalize sales. And according to the Colorado Department of Transportation, highway fatalities are near historic lows in years following legalization in the state. As it pertains to tax revenue, based on statistics from American Cannabis Consulting, a dispensary in a town like ours would generate roughly $10 million annually in revenue per store. A rural town would generate roughly $3 million. That means 3 dispensaries taxed at 5% could generate $1.5 million in sales tax alone. That matches state lawmaker estimates that say Illinois is expecting to do $2.5 billion in sales, split over 295 businesses, resulting in a little under $8.5 million per store. If you're concerned about teenage drug use, according to the Journal of American Medical Association, after legalization, usage among high school students fell between 8 to 9% depending on the age group. If you're concerned about the crime resulting from a cash-only business, there are 3 recent developments that are making these concerns moot. First, apps like CanPay already exist and allow for customers to pay digitally through a debit card, resulting in no hard currency exchange or store. Second, Trump has indicated that he will sign the bipartisan Strengthening the 10th Amendment through Entrusting States Act that would, quote, ensure that each state has the right to determine for itself the approach to marijuana within its borders. The bill also extends these protections to Washington, D.C., U.S. territories, and federally recognized tribes, and contains common sense guardrails to ensure that states, territories, tribes regulating marijuana do so safely. Trump told reporters, "I support Senator Gardner. I know exactly what he's doing. We're looking at it, but I probably will end up supporting that, yes." Third, each presidential candidate, including Trump, has come out in favor of federal legalization. If you're concerned about the recent reports of deaths involving vaping products, the issue has been found to be related to bootleg products containing vitamin E. These incidents are being seen in states like Illinois, Kansas, and Utah, where marijuana is not legal or regulated. Legalizing the sale in this county of the product would reduce the risk of people buying unregulated, dangerous products. And finally, it's the will of the people, as according to Pew Research Center, 64% of people are in favor of legal sales of marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just take a moment here and remind everybody watching at home and here in the audience tonight that what we're considering this evening is not the legalization of the sale. It is the potential zoning to allow for it within our community. And what we're really asking is, do we want, as a council, to invoke the Plan Commission process, which is a series of public hearings that allows for additional public consideration of the item, additional input from the public, prior to this body making any decision about actual zoning, thumbs up or thumbs down. So the question before us tonight is not, is it legal? It is not, are we selling it in Downers Grove? It is, are we going to forward this subject to the process that we use for many other subjects to get a further public input and further staff analysis? So with that, is there any additional comments or questions from, oh, I'm sorry. Come on down. Thank you.
Hello, Christine Martin, 701 Maple Avenue. I understood what you just said, Mayor Barnett, but I still am here because I know this is the beginning process, I understand, so I'm still here to give my opinion. I come here as a parent, and I'm speaking as a parent. As a parent today, we have so many things come at us through technology and through social media, having to deal with our children. It's really difficult. I believe most of you have children, and so on a daily basis, as a parent, we are confronted with some really seriously hard issues. And so Downers Grove is a family-friendly neighborhood. We've been put in the newspaper like that. We are known for that, like Naperville has been sort of named a really family-friendly, good neighborhood. And we don't need strip clubs here. We sure as heck don't need to be selling marijuana here. So I just do not feel that putting pot shops in Downers Grove is not going to entice teenagers. It sends the wrong messages to kids. And as a parent, I don't want another one, and I don't want to see my children or any of your children having to deal with this issue. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council colleagues? No? Okay. April, would you call roll?
Commissioner Jose?
I'm sorry, I guess I didn't understand your question. I thought I heard you say any other comments from the public. Did any other commissioners want to speak on this issue?
Go ahead, Rich.
Okay, so I've done an awful lot of thinking about this, and I'd like to say that I read every one of the research papers when we got this packet on Friday, and drilled into every one of them when we had to come on Tuesday. My expectation at that time was we'd have more time to drill in. This issue is personal to me, and because I have family members that have been very much touched by this issue, and once again, legalization is going to happen no matter what. I got similar emails from people, a certain number that said opt in, and I would say the majority of those were based on the tax revenue that was to be achieved by that. And I almost was tempted to write back to those people and to ask them if the cost actually outweigh the cost of enforcement, regulation, and monitoring, and the other social results from selling this in Downers Grove were more than the tax revenue. Would they still want to do it? And then the second question I would ask those people, if you're watching at home, is, and if that is the case, how much more would you be willing to invest in your own tax money to support that? The other thing that really resonated with me, and it took a little bit more time for me to appreciate this, were Chief Gillette's comments and the potential increase of incidents in driving under the influence for those traveling to and from dispensaries, the potential increase of investigations for adults providing cannabis to underage individuals, the potential rise in illegal trafficking of cannabis legitimately purchased from a dispensary. The dispensaries may be a potential target for robberies. And then my research said that in November of 2017, there was an armed robbery in Greenview Township in Sanilac County in Michigan, where 7 armed men attacked a medical growing facility. The FBI got involved, and 3 people were killed because of this. And then I'm thinking, okay, for some possible nominal results that we may or may not get as a result of taxing this, and keep in mind, there's no business that has stepped forward and said, I've got a business plan, here's the place I want to put in, here's the square footage I need, I don't need any special requirements for the setback, and in my first year, we're going to do $2 million and $5 million in the second year and $10 million. we first have to find one of those businesses, or they have to find us, and I've been in business for a long time. I got in the business world, gosh, back in 1971, 1972, and I've run startup businesses, and it always takes a lot longer to get them going. Well, we haven't even been approached by that. So then in my mind, the tax revenue that we propose we're going to get is sort of melting away. Then the other thing I mentioned last week in talking to family members who happen to use the product, and the attitude was, well, they're going to buy it anyway, so you may as well not have them drive too far. And from what I've heard in discussions, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Lombard is moving forward with permitted by right, which means the business would be able to locate in Lombard. I wouldn't be surprised if Westmont were to okay this, because Westmont has freestanding bars, which we don't have in Downers Grove. They also have these gaming places where people can go there and do video gambling. So Westmont has already taken the step to okay sin taxes. So I would ask a Downers Grove resident, if you were a user and this drug was so important to you, is it unreasonable for us to say, based on all of these risks that Chief Gillette brought to our attention, is it unreasonable to suggest that you might have to drive to Westmont or Lombard if you're going to buy the product anyway? And does it have personal problems? Yeah, it does. I have two granddaughters, one that's physically addicted, who spent 30 days, 1 year in rehab in Rosecrans, and 90 days down in Texas because she was physically addicted. The people that are physically addicted to this product are 9% in the normal society, and amongst teenagers it rises to 17%. And I had another granddaughter who's precious to me, who, against her will, they had to sign over parental rights, and they took her away without her even being able to say goodbye to her younger sister to forcibly go into rehab for 30 days. So this is a product we're very familiar. Someone that was very dear to me, for those who say this is not a gateway drug, started using marijuana because he loved getting high. And then he started using Tylenol, and then he started using heroin. And he didn't get addicted to heroin, but he started using needles. And he got hepatitis C from those needles and had to go through all of this chemotherapy for decades because it was destroying his liver. And then at 61 years old, he died of a massive heart attack, probably 20, 25 years before typical family members. So this touches me personally. I think we have to let some of these risks pan out. The underage usage in California is 7% higher in 12 to 17 age group. It's 40% higher in Colorado. It's 60% higher in Oregon. It's 30% higher in Washington. The youth rate in legal states is 9.1% compared to 6.46%, and on and on and on. Also, it hasn't stopped illegal pot sales. California still has 78.4% of their sales are black market illegal. Colorado, 34%. Massachusetts, 76.3%. Oregon, 41.4%. Washington, 35%. And one of the things the chief said that resonated most with me, it takes about 2 years for this stuff to level out. And I don't think that this will be our last bite at this particular apple. And if we guess wrong, and if people get the attitude that because Downers Grove said you can buy it here, that it's perfectly okay, I think it's well worth us waiting for 2 years to see how this thing pans out, to let these other communities deal with the actual experiences so we can see what the results are in Illinois. So I'm sorry for being long-winded. I had a lot of ground to cover. It took me this whole week to fully collect my thoughts on this thing. And once again, I'm saying if you're not willing to drive to Lombard or Westmont and you think that's an unreasonable restriction that this village council is putting on you, I could live with that as a consequence, and therefore I'm going to vote no on this.
Thank you, Rich. Sorry to have cut you off. Before we go back a second round, anybody that hasn't spoken that wants to touch on the subject?
I think I'd like
Kevin,
to
go ahead.
speak. Last week, as we were processing some of this information, I found myself in real time taking in brand new information. I think all of the council members were doing so. And what I tried to do in this process as we try to get to this point right now was really break down all this information I think that everyone's been taking in. I think we've all been inundated to some degree by numbers, tons and tons of numbers, whatever direction. But what I tried to do was put this into a couple of succinct categories that I hope to relay. The first one was this risk versus reward topic that we're talking about. We're looking at restrictions that only zone out these businesses to certain areas. And when I looked at that for the first time last week, it looked as, without going into any further details, a very limited opportunity. Okay, I could be totally off, to be totally wrong. I work with startups and small businesses all the time, and you heard me rattling off the word location, location, location. When you look at it from a zoning perspective, without doing anything else, the opportunity to me seemed like one that was limited. We talked about numbers. I think Rich touched on it before. The numbers always come in lower than what you expect or think. And so, depending on where you start with this issue, if you're starting with the state of Illinois and their $3.2 billion deficit, maybe it's a financial issue in how you are going about this. And for other municipalities, it might be different. But the numbers always come in at a lower level than what you think. And I was trying to throw out last week, best case, worst case, middle case scenario. And in my mind, all I'm seeing is, if we're talking about it from a number or line item filler perspective, tax revenue, I'm looking down here at the bottom, okay? The Pandora's principle is something that kind of rattled through my head. We're opening a box to some degree of unknowns. There are things that we will not possibly see related. We can budget this out, we can spreadsheet this out, we can talk numbers all day long, but then there are the intangibles related to the unknown or something new that you won't know about until you are however far ahead or however long in the process. And so I just kind of, the word Pandora principle just kind of jumped out related to this issue. Another item that I tried to make sure that I pushed this down in the list of items, so this risk versus reward. We can go all day in terms of numbers, but something struck me, as was it last week, where the state's attorney's office had immediately began to expunge tens of thousands of pot-related arrests, or whatever's on the record, related to this issue. The state, it's noted that the state of Illinois will have an estimated 700,000 possible cases that are eligible for being expunged. 700,000 lives, to some degree, have been altered, changed, or switched by an issue that, to some degree, we're talking about from a commercial standpoint of perspective. And for me, that's a little personal, but I'm going to wipe that one off the list, because we're talking about it from a retail perspective, and there are tens of thousands of lives that had to immediately had a button push to start that process, a reset button to some degree of their lives, and some other hundreds of thousands more coming down the pike. I don't know what that has translated to in terms of their life and their livelihood over the years. 700,000. Do the words, let me see the words that I wrote down here, and see if they still apply as we're talking about retail. Thug, hoodlum, dealer. Do those words still apply now that we're talking about retail locations for cannabis? Or is it now convenient? Is a dispensary a decent word to use? Is that okay? Social equity is another word that centers around this issue. the individuals, I looked up this, looking at the application for the dispensaries and everything else, it is a $5,000 application fee, if I'm not mistaken, and a $40,000 licensing fee. What individuals who were on the outs of this process now have the resources to participate in this new world process? Since it's legal, shouldn't everyone get that opportunity? They are trying to create options to allow folks who are on the outs of this to participate, but the real likelihood in this new gold rush, most of the individuals who have sat on the outside of this and who have been criminalized for it will not even get a chance to participate. And then lastly, I think kind of skipping over some things because I don't want to go too long, is I have here the future of Downers Grove. I'm an individual that moved away and moved back. I've been back in this area for 6 years. When my wife and I were in college, her family lived probably a mile or so beyond where my family currently lives. And so this area, as I was a collegian, is very familiar to me. When I came back to this area, I chose to live in Downers because I had, in a sense, grown up here. My college years were spent here. I couldn't understand what our starting point was on this issue. Was it opportunity? Was it options? Was it taxes? I had no clue where we were starting from with this issue and wasn't really sure why we were moving as fast as we were. What have we learned? I've only been back here 6 years, but I would ask anyone who's been here longer than that, are there issues that we've learned about from the past dealing with other businesses that could have been considered controversial that might apply to what we're talking about this evening? What have we learned? One of the first conversations I had, I'll close with this, one of the first conversations that I had when I came on as commissioner was simply this: what is the image, what is the brand, what is the vision that we have for Downers Grove? It was a simple question. Over beers was simply, hey, what is, you know, the air, what do we aspire to? I believe that Downers Grove aspires to something bigger and greater than what we can see. What is our brand? And I think the parting question would be, or just a comment would be, if you understand brands and the importance of brands, two things can happen. Everything that you do will either contribute to the development or the enhancement of that brand, or it tears it down in some small way. And I would only ask, is the decision that we're making tonight improving the brand or the long-term image of Downers Grove, or is it not? I do not believe that it is, and so I'm voting against the zoning ordinance to allow dispensaries in the village. Thank you.
Thank you. Marge?
5 or 6 years ago, I was at a American Planning Association conference in Los Angeles. And every other topic was about, or so, was about the unintended consequences that California was dealing with in terms of medical marijuana, the growing, the using, all of the problems that they had not foreseen when this became legal. This is a group of planners, generally people who are tend to be on the more liberal side of things. 1,000 people, mostly from all over the country, but a lot of them from California. And they were trying to warn everyone that this was coming, and there are so many unintended consequences from smells from growing facilities that they thought they were far enough away and that have happened, to crime, to the fact that it may look like, you know, a medical store or an iPhone store now if it's retail, but that doesn't persist over time. You don't get businesses wanting to locate next to what they perceive as an undesirable business, and this falls in the category of an undesirable business. All of these things give me great pause. I did not support this zoning ordinance last week as it was written. I still do not support it, and I don't think that if we do opt in at some further time, that we certainly don't need to be the first in the area to opt in. Nearby communities will be doing it, and we just don't know the costs, and we do definitely know that there is some income, and the income does not look to be enough to cover the potential costs, and certainly the costs of things that are intangible, and we've talked about this before. The gateway drug situation, as Rich has mentioned, he's witnessed and lived with firsthand, as I have in my neighborhood, and some of the aftermath of that, which becomes very difficult. That is just not the way I would like our community to be perceived. That is not the way I think we should go about gathering revenue. We haven't in the past. There are things we have said no to, and no for a reason, because the gains were not worth the tolls, so to speak, the socioeconomic tolls, the tolls on a family, the tolls on people who can least afford them often. And I think that in this situation, I have to say no to the proposed zoning ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, please.
I'll go. Thank you, Mayor. I want to be as clear as possible as to why I'm voting the way that I am this evening. We've been presented with information from our village staff. We've heard feedback from residents here in our council chambers, as well as through email. We've heard from our chief of police. Most, if not all of us, have spent countless hours on our own researching this issue. Taking all of these things into account, I would like to pause when it comes to cannabis businesses in our town, and I'd like to emphasize pause. The reason for this is my concern regarding the following issues. First, we've asked staff for the current cost projection for our village post-legalization, because marijuana will be legal in Illinois starting on January 1st, 2020 per House Bill 1438. Because of the nature of this topic and lack of experience with it, we cannot truly be provided with these cost projections, much less cost projections for cannabis-based businesses. Secondly, the feedback that I have personally received from members of our community is very mixed. I'm going to show my sheet of paper, which nobody's going to be able to see, but I have been walking around with this sheet of paper, marking down every single resident that has either approached me or emailed us. The feedback that I've received is almost 50-50 in terms of yay and nay, and that's the feedback that I personally have received. I know that it's likely different for all of us. That feedback gives me discomfort and pause. Additionally, through the Municipal Cannabis Retailers Occupation Tax, local governments can collect up to 3%. I'm definitely not a math teacher for a reason, but if we sell $1 million of cannabis, we will receive $30,000. You can do the rest of the math from there. I think it's still up for debate whether the juice will be worth the squeeze. We cannot just consider revenue, but as elected officials, it is our job to consider societal costs. I fully understand that this will be legal, and this is not something that is going away, but we have no experience with how it will affect crime rates or drug driving in the area, and have no other municipality in Illinois to look for or look to for data. I would be remiss if I did not take into account Chief Gillette's statement from our last meeting. It's easy from the dais to struggle to relate. We are not on the front lines every day, and we certainly will not be with this issue as well, but our local first responders will be. I want to be thoughtful and allow them the opportunity to see what they will be up against starting in January without adding more to their plate from the jump. I was raised in a household that believed in people before profits, and that is something that I hold true today. Without a sense of how this will truly affect our community, coupled with the lack of cost projections, such mixed feedback that I personally have received from residents, potential societal costs in our community that are currently unknown, and with concern from our local law enforcement team, I believe we need to pause. I'm certainly not opposed to exploring this again at a later date. I'm still very interested in having some type of informational or community engagement event regarding this topic to educate and further engage the community. I've remained open-minded through this entire process, not coming into this with any opinion one way or another, and refuse to support feedback from only one particular group or school of thought in our village. It is our job in this role to hear all who seek to be heard, whether our own political ideologies match or not. My conclusion was not an easy one, but one that I believe is right at this moment in time. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, hot subject that everybody's got a lot of thoughts on, so we're going to go another round here if people still have stuff to say. We're not in a hurry. Rich, I didn't mean to cut you off before. I apologize for that. Leslie?
Yep. I just want to point out that this is not a vote on zoning ordinance. This is a vote to take this to the Plan Commission, which means that they would be able to engage the public in the ways that they are experts. So if we want to hear more from the public and we want to hear more information from the people who are experts, then we should be voting to take this to the Plan Commission so that they can do their jobs and they can hold public hearings. That is exactly the purpose of doing this and why we're taking this time. At which point, if we take this to the Plan Commission, and if they decide, you know, the public just wasn't in support of it, or we just really can't nail down any sort of estimates based on our expertise, at which point we can absolutely vote to opt out if we don't feel that we have the information. But right now, I want to be very clear that a no vote is a vote to get less information from the Plan Commission and less information from the public.
Right.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, let's make no mistake, a no vote is a vote to stop information. A pause is inherently a no. In order to get the process moving and be in place for when the legalization will take place, we have to go through a public hearing process. That requires hearings at the Planning Commission, that requires a first reading and a vote here. Those things all take time. Those things also include many public hearings. And if you're stopping the process, you're stopping the process. That means no public hearings, that means no input from the folks that are on the Plan Commission. Secondly, Chief Gillette might be soft-spoken, but I've never known him not to give you the full facts or his full opinion. And if he and the rest of the police department were of the opinion that the sale of cannabis was too dangerous for Downers Grove, I believe he would have said so. And to imply otherwise, I believe, is incorrect. It's been said that nobody's come forth with a business plan. I represent organized labor these days, but I spent several years representing businesses, and I know well enough that if you want a business to locate in your town, you have to be zoned for it or be open to zoning for it. And nobody's going to spend the money that it takes to design a business plan and bring it forward to you if you're not ready to hear it. And what you're hearing tonight is we don't want it. So to expect someone to come to us with a business idea when we're not ready to talk about it or even get more public opinion about it is putting the cart before the horse. In closing, Mayor, I don't understand why we would stop a public process when there's an opportunity to get more public input that apparently some folks want or say they want, and you could always say no later. I don't know why you'd stop the public input. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Greg. Anybody else? Anybody going around here? Rich?
Having sat on the Plan Commission for 3.5 years, it's an interesting thing. When I first got on Plan Commission, I thought you could actually knock on doors and ask people for their opinions and inputs until a lawyer told me, you're not allowed to do that. The only place you can take input on is at a public hearing. The next thing you learn on the Plan Commission is we have very specific guidelines on the things you can rule on. I think there's a half a dozen of them, and they're zoning issues related to land use. The final thing is, general welfare for that particular neighborhood. So typically, they would say, well, what is going to the impact be on neighbors of this particular business? So unlike us, who are the public policymakers, and there's a reason we stand for election, is you get to beat us up all day long and all night and send us emails and calls and things like that to allow us to get that kind of input. Plan Commission, a zoning board of appeals, any public body that specifically has public hearings is precluded from getting any input at that other than that public hearing. And then the other thing you have to learn and compartmentalize is when you sit on the Plan Commission or Zoning Board of Appeals, you're not allowed to take in the same kind of considerations that Village Council is. So I think we're asking them to do something that, even though it may be more informational, is not in their purview, and they don't really have the right to do that.
I agree with my colleagues that have suggested that stopping the process now stops the flow of information. Downers has, whether it's facilities for 17 years, or it's stormwater utilities, or it's the definitions we use in our liquor ordinances, has a history of trying to, some might suggest, overanalyze, but certainly involve as much of the community as possible and get as many details out as possible before a decision is made, as possible. What that means, to Greg's point earlier about timing, is this need not be decided tonight. It appears as though it's going to be, but let's make sure that we're all clear that the process is being stopped. The process of soliciting additional public input, the process of asking staff to look into numbers. We heard numbers thrown out tonight by almost everybody up here. Those numbers are, at this point, from each of us, not necessarily, peer-reviewed numbers from the industry. They are numbers we each found, which is fair. But if we're all going to take each other's input on those things, they should go through some process of verification. That's going to also stop tonight. The Plan Commission's role in a situation like this is a little different than ZBA. It's a little different than considering this particular application. It is, in fact, the conducting of public hearings. Those public hearings allow for lots of input on lots of subjects. None of the input is precluded by having a hearing. It is certainly precluded when we don't. So this is what this body does. We deliberate, and we have an odd number of us because we don't always agree, and that's a good thing. But I share the opinion that stopping this process tonight is stopping it too early without all the information and precludes us from additional public input. So with that, April, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
No?
Commissioner Calavani?
Nay.
Commissioner Wallace?
Nay.
Commissioner Earl?
Nay.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, the motion fails 4-3. Which takes us now,
Mayor.
sure, sorry, Marge, go ahead.
Mayor Barnett, I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to prepare an ordinance prohibiting adult-use cannabis business establishments other than medical cannabis cultivation centers and dispensaries from operating within the village of Downers Grove.
Second.
Okay, we have a new motion. So is there anybody from the public that would like to address the new motion? New motion being to prepare an ordinance for Downers Grove to opt out of the recreational cannabis business. Okay, additional commentary or questions from the council?
Yeah.
Right?
Mayor, 7 days ago, we all sat in these very seats, and 5 of us said we'd like to move forward with the first motion. Another one said, I'm okay with moving forward, but I'd like other limitations put in place as well. What I've heard tonight is nothing more than a flip-flop. There's no real new factual information. There's no real new feedback that's come from the public that said get out, opt out. Certainly not in overwhelming numbers. The feedback I've received has been 5-1 in favor of opt-in or better. And we've heard other commissioners talk about that tonight. I have no idea why things changed on such a quick timetable. And as a result, Mayor, I moved a table so that additional time can be taken to consider before moving forward with this option.
Second.
Motion to table is not discussed.
I know. April, please call the roll on the motion to table.
Motion to table. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski Fugit?
Aye.
Commissioner Gray?
Nay?
Commissioner Colavani?
Nay.
Commissioner Wallace?
Nay.
Commissioner Earl?
Nay.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye. The motion to table fails. Back to the previous motion. There's a motion to prepare an opt-out ordinance. Is there any additional commentary or questions from council? Leslie?
Yeah, I would just like to echo Commissioner Jose that I have some concerns that 7 days ago, we had the exact same information presented in front of us. We listened to the exact same discussions from Stan Popovich and from Chief Gillette, who did state that the total cost and operational impact of potential zoning is likely to be small when compared to the overall operating expenses. And knowing that 8% of any of the taxes collected on retail marijuana is eventually going to come back to the municipalities based on a per capita basis to deal with some of those unintended consequences that we already discussed. And I just have some serious concerns when we're hearing that at the very worst, we're 50-50, and on the other end, we're hearing about 5-1 where people are in favor of it. I have serious concerns that there are political ideologies that are kind of going on. If we are hearing that the residents are in favor of it and we are voting to completely stop the process, I have some concerns with that. I have been open and honest with folks from the very beginning. I haven't changed any of my views based on any sort of kind of things behind the scenes. I have spoken with residents. I have received your feedback. I have listened to the police chief, and I have read all of the materials. They're all the same materials that we received last week. And so, to me, this feels like quite a flip-flop. And I would like to stand by that. I think that more information is always better. I'm not completely solidified on the fact that I would vote to opt in come 3 months from now, but I am always in favor of receiving more information, and the more information we get means that we can better start to hone in on what those numbers really look like. So again, I just want to point out that right now, if we choose to do this, we are choosing to limit the information that we have, and I don't think that that's in the best interest of this community.
Additional comments, questions, Marge?
Yes, and in that, I would say that I don't think that we're limiting the input. I think we're just waiting to see what the immediate effects are going to be in our area and wait for that data to come in. And I really think that that's important to see where it happens here, because this is where we live and we are not someplace else. And I have received plenty of phone calls, emails, both ways. And as Nicola stated, my feedback is about 50-50. And I just don't feel comfortable moving forward with this at this time. I think that waiting until more data in our area comes to us is prudent, and that the risks outweigh the benefits in this case. And I would prefer to free up staff to move forward with other things that are on our plate instead of just going through some kind of exercise when this is how I already feel. So I think I made it clear last week. I thought maybe I didn't, but this is where I'm at today, and I don't have any problems with saying this is it. Pause. No.
April, could you do me a favor and reread the motion as you have it?
The motion to direct staff to prepare an ordinance prohibiting adult-use cannabis business establishments other than medical cannabis cultivation centers and dispensaries from operating within the Village of Downers Grove.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say this. I started tonight's comments saying that last week I sat in this very seat and said that I was processing new information that we had received in real time. And if you saw me in this seat, I was trying to get out questions as I processed this new information. The information that I read to you all off of this evening is the same paper I brought here with me last week. If you remember, the ending comments was a kind of a seconding of the, someone told me that they rewatched the video from last week, and they said, did I hear you say that you would be opposed to zoning out cannabis-based businesses in the area? And I said, yes, I did, because I kind of heard it mentioned, and I piggybacked on that. And so I would say I understand that this is a real topic. This is a serious topic. But when we talk about changing, not only did nothing I say change from last week, but I'm bringing you all the same information, and for someone to actually tell me that they heard me confirm a no last week, I have not changed. My thoughts haven't changed, and I even read to you exactly what I had brought to read last week. And so I think I'm pretty solid on where I stand with this issue. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I have to admit, my position evolved on this, and then I was collecting information all week long. I ran as an independent. I did not have a backing of a political party or a specific ideology. I have people all over this village from all spectrums of the political, or all sides of the political spectrum that support me because of the things I believe in. And I don't change my story based on who I'm talking to. I believe strongly in historic preservation. For those who are more conservative, it's because it adds value to our town, and people want to move here because we have these quaint old historic towns, and once you tear them down, that value is gone. I support trees because I have known for a long time that neighborhoods that have trees are more expensive and have higher property values. There's also the intrinsic value of, call the part of me a tree hugger. I just don't see the value in taking out a 150-year-old oak tree that's got, 150 more years to live to clear cut, when all they had to do was put some plywood down to protect the roots so it wouldn't die. So those are the positions I would present to both sides. On this issue, I kept an open mind. And I sat out there for, I don't know, about the last 4 years, and I noticed various village council members would dig in their heels as soon as they found out about an issue, and they pretty much lined up with their arguments. There were other village council members who would remain more flexible and continue to get input. And I have to tell you, I'm not against someone who has firmly held convictions from the get-go that says, I'm going to vote this way and here's why. But I have a lot more respect from the person that's going to take more input. I didn't know a week ago that 70% of Colorado towns had opted out, or 74% of Michigan towns had opted out, or 78% of California towns. I didn't know that the usage of 12 to 17-year-olds was 60% higher in Oregon and 40%. That didn't come up from the research that was in front of me last week. So, and then I thought, with the personal aspects of it, and once again, you can smoke the stuff, you can chew as many gummies as you want in your home. Nobody's going to stop you from that. So I think this became more of a political argument. I think it became more of an agenda-driven argument. And I didn't run as an independent to run on agendas. I intend to make my decisions fact-based. I think we don't have to have the first bite at the apple. Downers Grove was dry for many, many decades from when Prohibition was done away with, right? You could not go to a restaurant and have a glass of wine or a beer with a meal in Downers Grove, right? We still don't have standalone bars because we have the requirement that if you want to serve liquor, full-service liquor, you have to serve food, okay? And so there was a long time here where you couldn't go to any restaurant in downtown Downers Grove and have an alcoholic beverage. But we waited, we took a cautious approach, and that thing fleshed out. If this fleshes out in that same way, and this becomes normalized, we will have that same opportunity. But other than medicinal use, the only reason people use these products is to change their state of mind, and that's to get high. We're not talking about buying bicycles, buying flowers, buying sports coats. We're talking about a product that it's intended from the get-go, other than the municipal uses, to get high, because it's a psychoactive drug. And that's why I changed my mind at this point in time. And I hope if any of you get to sit up here, you will also leave yourselves open and flexible enough until you take that vote to be willing to do that.
Can I ask just a question, a point
Sure.
of clarification?
Yep.
So the motion as stated, that's not, that's a motion to just choose to completely not zone, correct, and not to press pause? Is that what we're saying right now?
This would be a motion to direct staff to prepare ordinances that would prohibit cannabis-based businesses.
Okay.
It is likely that there will be two sets of ordinance amendments. One to one of the chapters in our municipal code regarding general offenses and businesses.
Okay.
The other, which the council can choose to or not choose to do, is also amend the zoning ordinance to be in line with the balance of the municipal code, to make it crystal clear within the confines of the zoning ordinance that those are not prohibited, that those are not allowed in any zoning district. It's a similar approach we'd use with other land uses.
Okay.
That would require a hearing in front of the Plan Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think we beat this one for tonight. Yes? All right, last time around. Everybody? All right, April, please call the roll.
Commissioner Earl.
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani.
Aye.
Commissioner Gray.
Aye.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit.
Nay.
Commissioner Wallace.
Aye.
Commissioner Jose.
Nay.
Mayor Barnett.
Nay. Motion passes 4-3. Moving on. First reading. First reading is done a little bit differently. First reading, staff will introduce some items, give us some background, at which point the council will start some conversations, and then we'll ask for public input after that. On each item, there'll be an opportunity for public input, so if you've got something that's got your attention, please hang tight. With that, Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. Several items on tonight's first reading agenda. The first is an ordinance approving a redevelopment agreement with the Downers Grove Township. This redevelopment agreement would provide $275,000 from the Ogden TIF District to help with the cost of stormwater management and pedestrian crosswalks for the Downers Grove Township new building that will be used for food pantry and other Downers Grove Township uses. We're happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you, Dave. Any council comments or questions about this one?
I'm delighted
Mark?
to see this
Mark,
come
go ahead.
forward. So, my best wishes to the township. They are moving the food pantry to the first floor from the basement of their building so that it'll be more accessible to everyone. I'm delighted that we can help out with this important service for the community.
Thank you. Any comments? Rich?
I was impressed when I found out that you're going to be putting in native plants in a local poor drainage area. I really like the cooperation with District 99, that it will be a learning environment and a habitat for pollinators. I don't know if the green roof that was presented before is still going to happen, but that's intriguing to me. And yeah, it's I like this.
Okay, I think it's a fantastic opportunity for governments to partner together to improve our community. We're going to get some stormwater improvements, as Marge mentioned, some sidewalk improvements. There's an awful lot of kids traversing areas right now that don't have sidewalks, and we're going to kind of put them down on the path they normally take, which is a great way to do sidewalks. And at the same time, we're going to assist a partner government in providing way better services to our community. So I think it's a neat opportunity for all of us. Anybody from the public that would like to address this, please come up to the podium.
Following a fairly somber conversation here, I was hoping for it to be a little bit lighter going in, but my name is Mark Tolman. I'm the Downers Grove Township Supervisor. I'm also a resident of the village of Downers Grove. I did want to provide some comments to basically talk about existing conditions and who we're partnering with. First, I'd like to thank Mayor Barnett for taking some of his time to come out to the township and sit down and go through our chaotic mayhem in the building and traverse the site and talk about options. And he actually has contributed what I think is a very valuable addition to the project. I'd like to thank the Village Council for considering this project. I'd like to specifically thank Stan Popovich and his staff, and I'll circle back to that in a minute, and then also to Village Manager Dave Fieldman and Deputy Village Manager Mike Baker for showing some ingenuity and some creativity in making a project that will be helpful to everybody, in particular the poor, the needy, and the senior citizens. I think that's very commendable. Here's our existing conditions the township has been grappling with for the past 10-plus years when I started there as a volunteer. There's not enough parking for residents who come to the township offices. There's no public access to the fish, food, and clothing pantry in our basement. There's not enough meeting space to address services to residents. Now, parking is the simple one. It's a continuing problem. We simply don't have enough. When we started working up costs to create an ADA-compliant public access to our basement, the best estimates kept going through the roof. We found we were going backwards instead of forwards, trying to retrofit a fully and publicly accessible basement. Doing the preliminary studies and meeting specifically with Stan Popovich and his staff at Community Development, it kept us from going down an expensive, wrong pathway that didn't fully meet our present and future needs. So here's a brief rundown of what the space is for. The Fish Pantry is a non-for-profit charity that started in a church closet 50 years ago, and it grew based on need. Founder Ruth Anderson and her all-volunteer crew are currently at the front end of celebrating that 50 years of feeding, clothing, and providing for the needy, and they've been valued partners with us for over 36 years. The Fish Pantry is staffed, like I said, 100% by volunteers. The Fish Pantry assists other food pantries and supplies other not-for-profits. For example, the Family Shelter Service, a local women's shelter here in Downers Grove Township. By building and moving to a ground-level facility, the Fish Pantry can continue to serve residents with greater efficiency and safety, positioning them to serve for the next 50 years. 16% of Downers Grove Township live below the poverty level. While they are invisible to most residents, and seniors in particular prefer not to be in the public eye, we at the township see them very clearly because that is part of our charge. They need help that we provide. When we hold meetings and events here at the township, we're filled beyond capacity. A properly sized meeting space for seniors and senior activities is one key component of serving our residents now and in the future. Part of our plan includes providing the DuPage Senior Citizens Council, also a non-for-profit group of mostly volunteers, with kitchen prep and staging for delivery to over 400 locations of Meals on Wheels to residents of our township, including Downers Grove. We will find additional ways to use this partnership, as well as our partnership with the Fish Pantry, to further serve those in need. Another part of our plan includes another group that provides needy families with raised bed vegetable gardens, GardenWorks LLC. We look forward to installing several of these gardens for a senior gardening club. It's a proven fact that gardening helps the mental and physical health of senior citizens, and the vegetables grown will go to the efforts of the Fish Pantry and the DuPage Senior Citizens Council. We will also be partnering, as you mentioned, with High School District 99 in two main regards. First, at least in my mind, which was the bigger push, the environmental science classes at North High School will be changing the remaining grass lawn to an educational STEM lab of prairie and pollinator plantings, giving students hands-on environmental science experience and providing a public place where residents will see how they can, themselves, create efficient, smaller spaces that reduce water runoff and foster bees, butterflies, and birds. And the second regard is the student pedestrian safety, which is currently a hot topic. We propose to extend our public sidewalk through the center of our property with signage directing pedestrian and student traffic away from the streets and onto the sidewalk. This public throughway to and from Saratoga and Ogden, which is a lighted intersection, will be lit and have security cameras 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Plans call for additional roadway striping for crossing and right-of-way alert signage at the corner of Prince and Sherman where pedestrian student traffic crosses from our property onto the high school campus. Last but not least, we are a designated FEMA distribution site in the event of catastrophe. The space created will allow us to receive supplies so FEMA personnel can distribute them to the township populace in the event of a disaster, which we hope never comes to pass. The redevelopment agreement with the village that you consider tonight is a key assist that helps makes this project work and that helps all of these component groups and all of the communities in southeast DuPage County. When people looked at our floor plan, which I showed the mayor, the most common question for the building is, where's the new offices? Well, there aren't any new offices in this building. The spaces created are so we can better serve the residents of the township, southeast DuPage County. Partnering with the high school and with several non-for-profit groups allows us to position services to our residents now and in the future. Your assistance makes this all happen. I will refer back to Commissioner Colavani and his love for trees. This is very similar to planting a tree. Myself, the trustees who are in attendance tonight, Art Donner, Karen Kelly, our clerk, Lorraine Grimsby, and our engineer team leader, Ed Kalina, I'm blanking out. He was on the comprehensive plan update several years ago, so he's familiar with village issues. Kind of like planting a tree. None of us really expect to be around to sit under it and enjoy the shade, but we look forward to the entity itself being able to help people in the future. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I just want to say that I really am excited about this project. There's some pretty new peer-reviewed research out there that suggests that even just 15 minutes in green space can really improve your mental health. And so knowing that there are going to be opportunities from high schoolers all the way through seniors is a wonderful addition to the community, as well as I'm sure at least many people are aware, we recently had an ad hoc committee for human services that just completed their report. And so getting to see some of those human services come to fruition, even just in the township, is another welcome addition to the community. So I really appreciated this.
Thank you. Dave?
Thank you. The next item on our first reading agenda is informational and a discussion of the results of our water rate study. It's my privilege to introduce to the council David Hyder, a principal at Stantec, the village's consultant on this project. If he looks familiar to some of you, it's because he was the consultant on our last water rate study in 2010 and also helped us tremendously in 2012 and 2013 as the principal on our stormwater utility feasibility study. Oh yeah, little projects like that. So we're very glad to welcome back David Hyder to present tonight's report.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. I do have a short presentation. I don't know if it's good to mention that I'm a part of those things or not, but maybe setting me up for some issues here. But yeah, we do have a relatively brief presentation. I want to take you through the results of the water rate study. In terms of our agenda, I'm going to just provide a little bit of background, how we conducted the study. Then we'll talk about the revenue requirements, what it costs to operate the water system. We'll talk about whether your current revenues are sufficient to cover that, and then we'll move into the rate structure. How do you actually charge for water? So first off, just a little bit of background. The water system, it's generally out of sight, out of mind. Other than the tanks, you don't really realize how extensive your system is, but you do have a very extensive system. It's probably one of the largest assets that the city maintains. You've got 7 elevated storage tanks, total volume, storage volume of 8 million gallons. You've got 6 rate control stations that control the flow of water throughout the village. You've got 233 miles of water distribution mains. So end to end, that would take you from the village to Milwaukee and back. More miles of pipe than you do roads in the village. 2,800 public fire hydrants, and 2,800 main line distribution valves. So it's an extensive system. It's a valuable system. You've invested a lot to get to where you are today. In terms of background, as Dave mentioned, I was involved in 2010 helping the village look at the last water rate study, so it's been quite a while since the last study was conducted. At the time, the key issues in that study were the fact that you were seeing really significant increases in the cost of water from the DuPage Water Commission. You're looking at 10% increases on an annual basis. You're also weren't doing the necessary investments in terms of repairing and replacing the system, so we did come up with some recommendations for investments in the system. And I can happily say that you've made significant progress over the last 9 years. You've ramped up to where you're now investing in replacing 1% of your water mains per year, so you're doing about 2.3 miles per year, which is great. I know that doesn't sound like a lot when we say 1%, but that essentially assumes that a pipe can last 100 years, which isn't unusual. So that's a great thing. You've been able to do that affordably by leveraging low interest rate loans from the IEPA. So you've got interest rates of about 1.75%, which is great. But the work's not done. You still have a significant amount of investment that needs to be made. As I mentioned, your pipes, we're expecting them to last 100 years. We're going to have to continually replace pipes. And in order to continue to get those loans from the IEPA, you need to have your revenues match your expenditures. So we need to keep up the momentum that you've created over the last few years. In terms of our approach for the study, it's pretty straightforward. The first thing we do is we forecast the expenses of the system over a 10-year period. We have a financial model that we've built that the village will be able to use in the future. We also forecast revenues to look at then, are those revenues sufficient to meet those expenditures? If they're not, we need to develop a financial plan to get revenues in line with expenditures. And then we always want to look at your rate structure. Is it appropriate? And then demonstrate what the customer impacts would be associated with that financial plan. So first item on that scope of work is essentially water revenue requirements. And we need to make some assumptions. We're, again, doing a 10-year forecast period. And the assumptions that we're making in that forecast are here. So we start with your fiscal year 19 budget. And then we forecast that forward on a line item by line item basis. And we look back and see how individual line items have increased over time. And you're averaging about 2.5% inflation in your O&M costs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you purchase your water from DuPage Water Commission. We're assuming that going forward, you're going to see about 3% increases in the cost of purchased water. However, you've also seen declines in the amount of water that you're purchasing because your customers are using less water. And so that's factored into those costs as well. Got a 10-year capital plan of $54 million. A large piece of that is the water mains, and then we're assuming you're going to use cash and continue to use IEPA loans to fund some of the capital program. So what this looks like, first off, some of the expenditure items here we have, this is just a graphic showing a 10-year projection of your operating costs, which are in orange, your purchased water costs from the DuPage Water Commission, and then the existing debt payments you have to the IEPA for the loans that you've taken out. So you can see that a significant portion is purchased water, but you do have to maintain the system. Once you get the water, there are certainly costs that the village incurs in the capital as well as the operation of the maintenance of the system. The next component, and generally what has a big impact on your revenue requirements, is the capital. And as I mentioned, we've got a $54 million capital plan over the next 10 years. These are the categories of projects. Up at the top, you can see the vast majority of spending is in water main replacement, assuming about $4 million per year. You've got some storage tank rehab, assuming some meter replacement will need to take place in 2024 and 2025. Again, we're assuming you're going to fund this with a mix of cash and debt. So when we bring all these together, we can look at what your total system revenue requirements are. This is what it costs in total to operate the system. So we have your O&M and purchased water. We have layered on top of that both existing debt and future debt to fund the capital. And then there are some projects, as I mentioned, that you're going to cash fund. So that's the final layer there. So you're looking about revenue requirements of about $17 million, increasing to about $21 million by the end of the 10-year forecast. So that's the first component. Next, we can shift and look at your revenue sufficiency to see if our revenues are sufficient. And the first thing we need to consider here is what is our forecast for use on the system, because the vast majority of your revenues come from metered water use. So if your customers use less water, or your village residents use less water, you essentially are going to get less revenue. And what we've seen is that you've historically had about a 1% decline in per customer use. And that's very common. We're seeing that all over the country. Some communities we're seeing even more than that. But just with fixture change out, conservation ethic, people not watering as much, we're seeing declines in water use. So our forecast does assume that you're going to see a 1% decline going forward. So your revenues would be eroded to some degree based on that decline. We're also assuming that you're not going to have new customers joining the system. So when we compare the revenues and expenditures, there's certain metrics that we want to make sure we're meeting. And the first is that we want to have structural balance. We want to make sure our revenues and expenditures are aligned. You do have a policy in terms of maintaining reserves, since this is a self-supporting fund, the water fund. And you want to maintain 3 months of rate revenues in a reserve. And then finally, important for issuing new debt is you need to make sure that your revenues are sufficient to cover your expenditures and they can cover those annual debt payments. That allows you to continue to issue debt and receive those loans from the IEPA. So when we bring the numbers forward, in the detail here in the table, we're showing just the next 5 years forecast, but you can see in total the revenue requirements in 2020 are forecasted to be about $17 million. You can see the various components there. That's ramping up to about $18.3 million by 2024. And then if you don't change your water rates, so if we keep them in place where they are today, you're generating about $15.5 million. That will gradually decline with that 1% reduction. And so you can see that your revenues are insufficient right now to cover the expenditures that we've identified. And that's anticipated to happen all 5 years. And the next graphic here just shows, again, the revenue requirements that I talked about earlier, along with a black line here, which is your revenues from your current rates. So this is assuming you don't raise rates. So ultimately, over the entire period, we're showing shortfalls. What this would do in terms of your cash balance, obviously you do have some cash balance, which is great within the water fund. But by 2023, if you don't raise rates or adjust expenditures, you essentially would fall below that minimum balance that we want to maintain. 2024, you're essentially in negative territory, and then that would continue, obviously, if you don't cut spending or raise rates. And so ultimately, the solution that we've come up with is a financial plan that would allow you to gradually increase rates and revenues over time. What we're forecasting is 4.6% increases in rate revenues each of the years over the 10-year period. This is something that the village looks at every year, so you're not adopting a 10-year plan, but we believe that's what's required given the expenditure forecast. That would allow you to continue to replace 1% of mains. I would ensure that you're able to get those low interest rate loans from the IEPA, and it would maintain the fund balance. Ultimately shown here graphically, with these 4.6% increase in revenues, you can see the black line essentially matches the revenue requirements, and then we are spending down some of that cash within the water fund, but we're maintaining that minimum balance. So ultimately, that's the recommendation in terms of the financial plan. And we can shift gears a little bit and talk about water rate structure and then some comparisons. So your water rate structure as it stands today is very common to many municipalities. You essentially have a fixed charge that you charge on a bi-monthly basis. That fixed charge is graduated based on meter size, which essentially effectively is the reserve capacity that somebody has in the system. And then for metered water use, you have a rate for inside village and outside village, so for the actual metered quantities. As I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of communities are seeing declines in water use, and part of the challenge there is that a lot of your costs in providing water are fixed. Yes, your purchased water would go down, but the cost of maintaining and operating the system don't, whether people use water or not. And so fixed charges are very important in that they provide revenue stability, they help you recover those fixed costs. And so over the past 5 years, you've kept your fixed costs constant. They haven't changed. And you currently see about 12% of your revenues come from your fixed charges. A lot of communities around the country are gradually increasing their fixed charges to increase that amount of guaranteed revenue to provide that revenue stability. And we see anywhere from up to 30% of the revenues coming from fixed charges. Now, what we're recommending for the village is that you target over the next 10 years to get to a 20% revenue generation from your fixed charges. And that you could do that within this financial plan of doing the 4.6% increases. You just essentially would increase the fixed charges at a little bit higher rate than you do the usage charges. Essentially, this next table shows you what the fixed charges would be under that plan. By 2024, you would be at 15% of your revenues coming from the fixed charge instead of the 12% today. And these rates would generate that additional 4.6% revenue. But common question is, what does this do to our residents? And by far, the vast majority of your customers are single family with a 5/8 inch meter. And this chart just shows you for a low water user, somebody that uses 4,000 gallons every 2 months, what their current bill is, $45.21, what it would be under the recommended rates. The average customer or resident within the village uses about 9,000 gallons per every 2 months. So their current bill is about $86, and you can see how that would increase over time. And then if you're a high water user, you pay $110 currently, and you can see how that adjusts. So finally, just to show you where you are in comparison to some of the other communities in the area, your current bill, which is shown here in the graph, is very comparable to a lot of the communities. You're at the lower end of the range. You're below the average, which is shown by the black line here. When you do an adjustment, if you do the 4.6%, you'd be coming just about up to the average. It's extremely important to note that most of these communities evaluate rates on an annual basis, and so these are the current published rates. So it's really an apples and oranges comparison in that we're showing you 2020 rates. We don't know exactly what these other communities' rates are going to be, but we do know that most of them are in a similar boat in that they're increasing rates. And so with that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Council questions to begin. Anyone have any? Rich?
Were those rates adjusted for inflation or in today's dollars?
They're all today's dollars.
Okay. The other thing that strikes me, when I first saw this 1%, it's going to take us 100 years. Are we okay with our water mains lasting that long?
Yeah, you see some that don't last that long and some that last longer. To be honest, I don't know that we don't know exactly yet in terms of how some of these pipes are going to perform, and that stuff that was put in the 1950s is only 50 years old, or in terms of that. But yeah, it's a solid number in terms of a replacement cycle for sure.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you have any idea of the reduced annual usage? How much of that comes from conservancy and just doing the right things for the planet versus, hey, it costs a lot of money, we're not going to water our grass?
I think personally, and this is a common question, and I don't know the exact answer, but what we generally see is that water is still not expensive enough that it really impacts people's use. The price elasticity on water, it's pretty inelastic. There are communities that have very, very steep inclining block rates, and so when you irrigate, it becomes very, very expensive. But I think personally what it is it's fixture changeouts. You can't buy high flow fixtures anymore, and so when you remodel a bathroom, you're guaranteed to reduce your use because you can't literally, unless you go to Canada, I don't think you can get a high flush toilet anymore. And so I think that's personally what it is. And the question we always get is where's the bottom? And I think we have a long ways to go in terms of the bottom, because the typical usage for a resident in the United States is about 67 gallons per day, whereas in Europe it's about 39 gallons per day. And they're way ahead of us in terms of efficiency of fixtures. So I think there's a long ways to go.
And my final comment is more editorial and somewhat inquisitive. I know years ago, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, we started doing the odd and even because Lake Michigan was down by like 6 feet. People thought, oh my God, our lake is draining. How dare you water your lawn twice a week or every day or what have you. Now I understand Lake Michigan is at record high levels and it's causing a reverse problem. Are we still in our policies, and not only us, but generally in the Chicago area, are we still solving a problem that we no longer have?
I don't think there's a supply issue. I think there's a maintenance of facilities issue, and that the infrastructure that was put in a lot of instances for free, and now these current generations are having to replace it. And so you've got the city of Chicago having to do all of its replacement, and then that trickles through. But I don't have enough knowledge in terms of the supply issue.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. You said at the top that you weren't sure if it was a good thing or a bad thing that you were involved in those other projects. For the record, I think it's a good thing. We've made a lot of progress on stormwater, and a lot of it was made possible by the implementation of the utility and the water rate and the stormwater rate increases that allowed for a lot of construction that took place that's alleviated some of the problem. And we have a lot more work to do. And I think the water rate study from 2010 and now again this year are another piece of that. This is a big part of your village taking care of its infrastructure, whether it's through maintenance or through capital improvement. And this is a big step in terms of making sure that we're funding it properly and making sure that it's sustainable for the long term. I particularly want to thank staff for the continued use of the IEPA loan program. It's pretty remarkable that we can find loans that are actually lower than we could get with our AAA bond rating. And I know I brought the idea to staff 6 years ago, and it's something that took a little time, but it made financial sense, and I'm glad we're taking advantage of it. As far as the supply issue, because we've seen some very big lows and now some highs in Lake Michigan, I don't think we should necessarily make any adjustments in what it is that we're doing, because we're seeing some short-term swings. On top of that, we know that out west there are a lot of places that would love to have Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, whether it's here in Downers Grove or throughout the Midwest region, to do what we can to take care of the Great Lakes. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Anyone else? And a couple of questions. I don't necessarily need answers for them tonight.
Sure.
First one is, from a debt standpoint, are there any benchmarks we can look at where we look at because this is sort of its own fund, its own operating tool, are there benchmarks that we could value our debt loads in some way? So system size, population size, annual volumes.
Yeah.
Is there a tool that we can sort of get a handle on the debt that we're projecting to try and incur via a plan, and where that puts us relative to sort of industry standards? Because we'd like to obviously, generally the village tries to keep our debt down as much as possible. It gives us some freedom and some flexibility, and I'd just like to get a sense of that, so I don't need that tonight.
I can speak to it a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are, actually in our financial model, we have some key performance indicators which talk about outstanding debt to number of customers you have on the system, and the rating agencies do provide guidance in terms of what they would argue is a good position in a favorable versus unfavorable. Generally, the guidance that I've seen is you don't want your revenue requirements, you don't want more than 30% of your revenue requirements to be debt. So essentially, if you're at $10 million on your total cost of the system, you don't want your debt to be more than $3 million, is one of the guidances. And you're nowhere near that in terms of what we're, with the debt that you're borrowing. And then to the point of, there is some benefit in using debt, obviously, in that it extends the payment period to match closer to the duration of the asset. And so you're not forcing current customers to pay in cash for something that's going to benefit for generations. So you can argue that the payment back of debt better aligns with the actual use of the asset, if that makes sense. So if an asset lasts 20 years and you pay off the debt over 20 years, you're essentially paying for it as you use it, is one of the arguments for it. But we can certainly circle back on what those key performance indicators look like.
In most instances, our debt in this case would probably be quite a bit shorter than the service life, though, right?
Correct.
And we've got that issue you touched on before. It's not unique to Downers Grove, of kind of current infrastructure in many cases being maybe not free, but put in via different vehicles to fund it.
Yep.
That we're having to try and figure out now. Some more commentary on debt load and what alternatives might look like. I'm looking at, I think it's it's listed as page 19. I don't know if it's really page 19 of the book, but You had shown us that table that kind of compared our rates. Yep, the bar chart, that one right there. But there's one below it that compares rates as well, but it gives you a breakout of usage versus base.
Yes,
And that is that available?
it is. We had it as a hidden slide. Number 25.
In case Mayor Barnett asked. was
That's
I-
right, we knew. Yeah.
So I guess I'd welcome some additional editorial from either Stantec or from our staff between now and next week. Just as a purely unscientific gut reaction, we struggle beyond just Downers Grove. We see it in every government and government-related agency, this whole idea of trying to cover base and long-term maintenance and sustainability of service delivery vehicles, really. So that just inherently makes me a little nervous when we look at that in light of things like the potential decline still. If you were trying to benchmark against Europe, there might be as much as a 50 or more % decline in volume in the long run. I'm just wondering if we should consider whether that ramp up ought to look a little different and a little more aggressive. It's not very scientific, but that in particular makes me wonder about that, the timing and ramp up period.
Yeah, and I can speak, this is a very common issue. A lot of communities, you could argue that probably 50% of your costs are fixed. The debt service is there, whether people use water or not, you got to maintain the system. But the closer you get to the fixed cost recovery at those levels, the more expensive it becomes for somebody that doesn't use much water. And so if you use very, very little water on the system, you could say, well, this is really having an impact to my low user, which sometimes is correlated with affordability and issues like that. So that's a very common concern. But what I would suggest is that you do continue to monitor. If you see a more steep decline in your water use, maybe that you need to react more significantly in terms of increasing of those fixed charges. It is, I agree, it's a rather gradual ramp up. The other counter to that is that some communities have their own water supply, and therefore they're bearing those costs, whether people use water or not. You do have the benefit and disadvantage of purchasing water, and so if you do use less water, you do pay less in terms of your costs on the system. And so more of your costs are variable than some communities. If I'm a community that has my own supply, 90% of my costs are fixed, whereas yours about 50% are fixed, and you have that other. So that would be the argument for needing a little bit less fixed cost recovery.
Yeah, makes sense. That 50% still makes me nervous.
I hear you.
Okay, any other? Thanks again.
I appreciate it.
Greg's right. It's a pleasure every time you're here. We're all a lot smarter for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I just want to take a moment to, again, call out David Hyder and his team that supports him. These are some of the best consultants we've worked with on any topic. They bring a great mix of independent expert advice coupled with working with staff on what the unique issues are that face our village. Well done again. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We just got done talking about water supply or drinking water, and now we will turn our attention to the type of water that falls from the sky when it rains, stormwater. And the next three items deal with improvements to St. Joseph Creek. Here to present background information on these three items is the Public Works Director, Nan Newman.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Dave said, I'm presenting three items. I'm going to present them together. They're all related to each other. They're related to the designing, permitting, construction, and grant funding of stream bank and floodplain restoration of a portion of St. Joe's Creek South. These items include a design-build contract with V3 Construction Group of Woodridge, Illinois, in the amount of $1,169,500, and the approval of two intergovernmental agreements, one with DuPage County and one with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, to assist with funding for the project. Combined, these grants will provide about $420,200, which is about a third of the project overall cost. Okay. This next exhibit shows the location of the project, which is on St. Joe's South between Main Street and Barth Pond. The purpose of the project is to improve water quality, stabilize the creek channel banks, and remove impediments that currently exist in the creek. The project includes remeandering the creek to a more natural state and regrading the banks and overbank areas to reflect a natural floodplain. Over the past several years, the village has purchased several properties along this corridor where there has been repetitive flooding of structures or that are located in the floodplain in preparation for this project. This photo shows many of the impediments that currently exist within the creek. Many sections of the banks are currently stabilized with old railroad ties, cinder block retaining walls, and concrete slabs, a majority of which all these are failing. They were put in independently by different property owners, as well as a lot of vegetation, dead trees that have fallen into the creek over time. The new stabilization will be installed, including vegetated rock toes, which are shown on the left. It's a series of rocks. It's all natural materials. It's rock and plantings along the banks, which will help stabilize the banks. The remeandering will allow for pools and riffles to be established. That's what's shown on the right. That's really kind of a fancy word for creating areas that are where the water is kind of restricted, so that makes it flow faster. And when it flows faster, you get more aeration into the water, which helps promote plants and animals within that corridor. The restoration plan involves removal of non-native invasive species along the banks of the creek and revegetated with riparian and prairie plants, resulting in an addition of about 1.2 acres of native riparian buffer. Besides looking aesthetically nice, this buffer also provides a transition between the creek and the private properties along the sides, which run off. You get things like salt and oils and different kind of chemicals, so the vegetative banks help absorb those kind of materials. The proposed improvements are designed to function all together to improve the overall quality of St. Joe's Creek, also Barth Pond, which it flows into. There'll be educational signs along the project area to explain these water quality benefits and how people might also incorporate them and look for them in other places in the community. The design and permitting are anticipated to be completed by spring of 2020, with construction and restoration work being completed by the end of 2020. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this project.
Any council questions?
I just want to say thank you for answering my multitude of questions that I threw at you in the last 24 hours. So I really appreciate the level of detail in these plans, much more so than I feel like I've even seen in the past, with down to, you know, what the silt fencing is going to look like. So I was really impressed with this, the level of detail in this. Thanks.
Okay.
No, sorry, I was trying to phone Leslie.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Any council, any questions from the public on this subject? Okay, thanks, Nan.
Thank you.
And it's our first reading tonight, Mayor Barnett. Thank you.
Attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. One item tonight, that's an ordinance approving a redevelopment agreement with Knoxville Township. It will be on next week's agenda. That's all.
Thank you, Enzo. Council member reports. Rich.
I have one report on September 24th at Gatto's Restaurant, starting at 6:30. There will be an event called This New Old House, and it will be a prominent event. It's $15 for the public, and it's free to members of the Downers Grove Historical Society. And we are going to have a renowned restoration contractor, Neil Vogel, who specializes in all kinds of buildings, most in the Midwest, but he's also worked on very prominent landmark buildings, Frank Lloyd Wright, and other buildings like that. So we would be pleased to have you join us on the 24th, which is 2 weeks from tonight. And you can just go on the Downers Grove Historical Society website and sign up.
Thank you. Leslie?
No report, Mayor.
Call?
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Kavanaugh?
No report, Mayor.
Marge?
Friends of the Edwards House House Walk, Historical Home Walk is this weekend. If you haven't gotten your tickets, they're going quick. They project a sellout, is my understanding, and tickets are still available, though, at this moment, and you can get them at the door as well, I believe, at the way this is going to work is that everybody is going to have to pick up stuff, their tickets at Platinum Partners Realty on above Emmett's, downtown Downers Grove, and then you can proceed to the houses, and the brochure detailing the houses will be your ticket to get into all 4 houses so that you can see the interiors of these fine historic homes. So that'll be all afternoon, starting late morning and going through the afternoon on Saturday. So I hope to see you guys all there.
Thank you.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
I have just a couple of brief follow-ups to report out on last week's meeting. Council is aware of most of these. We had a couple issues brought to us that got some additional information on. One had to do with Blanchard Avenue and a dead tree on private property. We did do some research. The village has the right to enact an ordinance requiring removal of dead trees on private property. The impact on code enforcement efforts of enacting such an ordinance is a little difficult to predict. Creating a new ordinance is never a quick process, as there are typically multiple elements of village code to consider, including definitions, rules, violation, penalties, remedy processes, enforcement, and village resource consumption. Council's been provided this additional updated information, and at this point, if the council would like to pursue this type of ordinance, we're recommending that it be discussed during our long-range planning discussions of high-priority action items. This could be made an action item to develop such an ordinance. That conversation is scheduled for a little later this month. Also, there was a property maintenance question at 898 Ogden, which is the Speedway on Ogden Avenue. Staff is currently working with the property owner on 2 complaints: overgrown landscaping and a fence in disrepair. The Speedway District Manager has been involved. The owner has a landscaping contractor who's been involved in conversations with staff. Since early August, there have been 3 site visits of village staff, with the owner agreeing to remove all the landscaping material along the fence by September 20th. That work started late last week, and address any fence issues in a timely manner once the landscaping is removed. We will continue to work with the property owner to make sure the issues are addressed to the satisfaction of existing village ordinance. Just thought that'd be good follow-up. Occasionally we get things that come to us that we weren't planning on, and so those watching at home in particular, who may have been in attendance last week, I thought might benefit from an update, same kind of update information that we get on a more regular basis. So with that, we are not yet done. We are going to move to the committee room for a continuation of our long-range planning process. Tonight's discussion has to do with Stormwater Capital Projects Plan. It is, by my clock, 8:48, so we'll take about a 5-minute break and reconvene over in the committee room.
Council meeting, and we're in the committee room to talk about continuing discussion of our long-range plan. Just a brief reminder of the long-range plan. It really has 4 components. First is it's a collection of our strategic goals, which guide our day-to-day operations and budget presentations. The plan also identifies issues which may affect our future. It outlines strategies and solutions which we may be using to address those issues. And the last component is our 2-year work plan, also known as priority action items, which this council sets in support of strategies and solutions and to achieve our strategic goals. This is a multi-meeting process that allows for a dialogue among the council, the staff, and members of the community. We've had 3 meetings so far, and we are on meeting number 4. Tonight we want to focus in on one of the issues identified by staff, which is our stormwater capital plan. So we're talking about the same kind of stormwater issues that Nan was talking about when we did the first reading agenda. Stormwater capital plan, what is the issue? Well, it's kind of a good news issue in that we have kind of gone through our current capital plan. In fact, the projects included in our current stormwater capital plan, the 2014 Stormwater Project Analysis, or SPA, will be completed by the end of next year. There's a little asterisk there. There are 3 big projects known as floodplain projects. They will not be completed next year. But all the other projects listed in the 2014 capital projects plan will be completed by the end of next year. And we all know that there are many areas in our village which still lack adequate stormwater infrastructure, and we still have more work to do. So we know that additional capital projects are necessary. So that's really the issue in a nutshell. We've made our way through our current plan. We need to update our capital plan. Our strategy and solution is pretty straightforward. By the third quarter of next year, we should create a new capital plan to guide our construction of projects from 2021 to 2026 and beyond. After the balance of the staff presentation here, we will be looking to the council for direction. It's also very straightforward direction that we're looking for tonight. Should the village continue with the next steps in the preparation of our stormwater capital projects plan? Should we continue with what you're about to hear? If not, why not? And tell us what you'd like to be changed as policymakers. The stormwater capital plan is part of a broader plan that we call the stormwater utility plan. It's the same plan that Mr. Hyder worked with us on in 2012 and 2013. It has 4 components. This will look very similar to the water study walkthrough that we just had. The first component is the establishment of a recommended level of service. What do you mean by level of service? Well, what outcome are we trying to achieve by owning and maintaining the system? Well, here it is. Our goal is to create and maintain a stormwater system which safely stores and conveys stormwater runoff for all properties in the village for 95% of the storms. 95 storms out of 100 in any given year, the system would be managed properly, managed well. It also contains a financial plan component to the overall utility plan. And there are a couple of key bullet points here. Our revenue needs. We need to increase revenue from $3.6 million back in 2015 up to $11.4 million at the last year of our plan, 2029. So a significant increase in revenue over that 15-year period or so. What that translates to is an increase in our storm water utility fees, which is basically our only revenue source in this system. 8.7% a year is what it takes to get from 3.6 million to 11.4 million over that time frame. Another component of our financial plan is that same idea of a use of cash and debt to make capital improvements. And the idea here is that we would issue about $10 million in bonds for capital projects every few years. And really what we're trying to do here is maintain an annual debt service payment of about $1.1 million per year. So this should look very similar to the water graphs that were just shown in the previous presentation. The stormwater utility plan also has an operations and maintenance plan. It's generally speaking, it's to increase the maintenance activities that we do from their then current level in 2015, which frankly wasn't all that much, to 100% of the recommended level 15 years later. Really what that ramp up is go from spending about $2 million a year on maintenance activities to more than double that, $5 million in 2029. And the last component is our capital plan, which is where the stormwater capital project plan fits in. Our capital plan is to invest $4 to $6 million a year in capital improvements. We should prepare and implement project plans. We have been doing that. We've been doing that since 2007. We've had 2 iterations of our stormwater capital projects plan, and they both have little acronyms. The first one is called the WIP, Watershed Infrastructure Improvement Plan. That served us well between 2007 and 2013. And then the SPA, Stormwater Project Analysis, 2014 to 2020. One thing we've learned from this is the next time we come up with one, we're just going to call it a capital projects plan, because we're
no more acronyms.
We're plumb out. So it may get a catchy little name as we move forward. But for now, we're planning on just a capital projects plan.
I'm sorry, plumb out, was that a pun? Or?
No, I don't think so. I hope not. Those 2 capital projects plan have led to significant and meaningful investments and improvements in our community. If you look back over this time frame since about 2008, we have completed 78 stormwater capital projects costing us $38 million. These projects are working as designed and have significantly improved stormwater management throughout the village. So we have a couple visuals here to really drive this point home. It's a map of the village. Each star represents stormwater projects, 78 projects, and what strikes me here is that the projects are located throughout the village. And they have all worked well, and they've worked as designed. I'd like to maybe add a little more detail and tell a few stories about some of the things that worked well for us. So I'd invite our Public Works Director, Nan Newland, to just walk us through maybe a project or two as an example.
Sure. We have a graphic here. It's a photo. Some of you may have been by this site. It's Second and Cumber. It's one of our showcase projects that we won a couple of awards for. This was an area where it's over by Pepperidge Farms. It had a history of flooding in even small rain events. We had about 5 houses that had severe structural flooding. So we purchased those properties. We installed this naturalized basin. We added about 2 million gallons of storage in this neighborhood. This is the plan for it. So it was a great, it's upside down. So this was a great effort. We reduced structural flooding. We put in a naturalized basin. We partnered with the Park District to make a connection, a pedestrian connection to an existing park. We changed the road network a little bit there, and that was a real great project. Just overall, I think the biggest, one of the most dramatic impacts to me is that when we would have even what I would call kind of a modest rain, we would send our crews out often in the middle of the night and pump out about 7 locations where people were getting flooding in their structures. We're not doing that anymore. So we've really had the opportunity to provide a lot of benefit to people, either through buyouts and projects like this, or by putting in infrastructure so we're not having to go out and continually pump and have a lot less nervous people when it rains.
Thanks so much, Nan. So you can see that the capital projects plans that we've been using to guide our investment have worked very well, and we've invested significantly. More work is needed. In fact, the work on the next iteration of our capital projects plan is underway. The council may recall that you recently authorized a consultant to help us by preparing a comprehensive level of service analysis. Well, what is that? That's a look at all corners of the village to figure out the areas that aren't served by the stormwater system to the level that we're looking for. These are areas that still have stormwater management issues. That project is already underway and should be completed by the end of this year. Also, council may recall extensive conversations about a DuPage County study of the St. Joseph's Creek watershed area, focusing on floodplain-related projects like the area in and around Deer Creek. That study should be completed sometime in 2020. So work is well underway, and the next steps that we're proposing, we will use the results of this comprehensive level of service analysis to do a couple things. One is identify the areas which are not served to the recommended level, areas that still have stormwater management issues. Once we know the areas, we can identify the projects that should be constructed to raise that level of service to what we're looking for. Not only identify those projects, but put them in some sort of priority order for construction. Once we know that, we can prepare preliminary cost estimates that will help us manage the finances and timing of this, and that will allow us to develop a general construction plan that is aligned with this stormwater utility plan in terms of if we're going to invest $4 to $6 million a year and we have the project prioritization, how do you slot those in? How does that work? So you can see how these next steps will get us our next iteration of a capital projects plan that fits nicely into the overall utility plan that's been serving us well for a handful of years. So that's our staff presentation. I'll circle back to this council direction question. Should we continue with our next steps in the preparation of the stormwater capital projects plan? Mayor?
Thank you. That's the good question. These are long-range plan, exactly this, right? It's not necessarily this year. It's what does this look like? Because all of these projects take some time to accomplish, but they also take time time to coordinate and prioritize. My experience thus far with being part of this process, I think we're doing a really good job of it. The 78 projects, 38 million, the net effect has certainly not been one where there's no flooding anymore, but the frequency of storm, which causes people to be in trouble, is way down. It really is. We're going to find other places with that service analysis that are still underserved, and there's no doubt quite a long list. But I think the process of going through that kind of a study and then prioritizing a list of projects and then working on a funding pattern that shoots for this 2029 condition, I think is exactly the right thing for us to continue doing. So with that, everybody should weigh in on this, because it's the point of tonight is to decide if we want to just agree or if we want to dig deeper. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'm good with continuing the way we're going. Although the 8.7% a year makes me want to kind of throw up a little bit, it is what it is, and I don't think we have any choice. This process has served us well twice before, and there are still needs, and we're just going to keep at them till we don't have the problems, at least in the frequency that we're having them. I think the only thing that I would like to change is I think the one thing we've had a lot of good response with is the cost share program, where we pay a portion of individual projects that each homeowner is doing, I think up to $1,000. I think we've had really good participation in that, and it's alleviated some little problem spots that we might not get to on a larger basis, and where people are actually willing to partner with us to do some cost share projects. I would not mind seeing, a $1,500 rebate. I don't think that that's necessarily a large burden for what the gain is for us, and I think that it would benefit our homeowners as well. So I'd be willing to increase that a bit. I think that that project share has shown the most promise. So.
And piggyback on what Commissioner Earl is saying, we've actually been doing that over the years, increasing it just as she's talked about, and every time we've increased it, we feel like we've gotten more participation, better bang for our buck, more improvements. Nan and John and everybody on the team continue to support this from the staff level. This is something that you will see in the 2020 budget for sure. We will again propose some increases and changes to that program because it's been working well for us.
Right, thank you.
I would just say, I think this issue for me and coming on as a commissioner has been probably one of the most complex of everything that has come down the pike for me to wrap my head around. And I would just say with that, I notice it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different tentacles. Because of my insight level, my only recommendation would be, based on what was presented, to continue. And I appreciate everyone that's kind of sent me information on this issue that's helped me move my knowledge base of this forward. But that's all I have.
Anyone else want to jump in? Rich?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I think we should continue as well. I also agree with Marge's comments about cost sharing. I did attend several of the sessions in Public Works of the Stormwater Oversight Committee. One of the things that the professional contractors felt is we need larger conveyances. I understand there's an issue with how much you can discharge downstream. However, that doesn't say that we can't make our conveyances larger and put the right kind of check valves in place to store it in place, under the ground. So I think that's something we should consider. It's also very intriguing to me because I grew up in this neighborhood, and that between 2nd and 3rd Street was a pond. And as little kids, we called it a swamp. And we used to collect cattails and tadpoles and things like that. So nature had put in one of those. And then back in the late 50s and early 60s, the big thing was, let's just fill those, it's a swamp, let's just fill it in. Well, where Pepperidge Farms parking lot was also one of those ponds, now that we know is a wetland. And it was funny, once they paved that over, flooding in that neighborhood got a lot worse. So we have to pay attention to what nature gives us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely need to continue with the next steps in the capital projects. I'm sure as we go through this comprehensive analysis that we're going to see that there are still some areas where that maintenance or different things can be improved upon. I know I personally have talked to at least 3 separate areas in the village over the last couple of months with regard to that cost share that have really valued that, and that has really helped them get some of the work done that is desperately needed so that they can use the yards that they have, that they were able to use maybe, say, 10 years ago, and now as we see, whether it be, you know, man-made structures or just the fact that we are seeing more frequent, intense rain events, that it's really impacting them. So I agree that taking a look at that cost share, maybe getting an analysis of how it's been used in the past and what we might project for the future as part of that comprehensive plan is beneficial. The only other thing that I can think of is knowing that we're getting this county study of St. Joe's watershed, which obviously runs through a very large portion of the village. I don't know if there's any, have we ever done any coordination, and will we ever consider coordination? And I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, considering where I live. We're kind of thinking about other municipalities. So we know that it is a watershed. So the things that we do here are still impacted by things that are happening in municipalities around us. And what kind of relationship do the municipalities have with one another, whether it be with DNMC or whatnot, to make sure that we are really having, 1, coordinated efforts, but 2, making sure that we are doing the projects that are actually going to impact the watershed the most and not necessarily only the ones that we have 100% control over, and what that looks like. And I will admit that as a new member, I'm still figuring all of those coordination pieces out. But I feel if we're really looking at the St. Joe's watershed, that's going to start to come into play potentially more than it has in recent years.
Yeah, this issue you're talking about is one of the most complex when it comes to municipal boundaries and how they don't really respect watershed boundaries. So this is generally the area here, totally within our village, but the watershed that contributes to the floodplain flooding area is all in this white space. This is commonly known as Westmont. So we have a great working relationship with Westmont. In fact, their current village manager was a longtime village engineer, has great expertise in stormwater, which really helps. He's known Nan for years. He's worked well with all the staff members. Their mayor also was a longtime executive director of their park district. There's a lot of park district land right along here that is going to be part of the long-term solution. In the current improvements that are underway for this fall in Deer Creek, Westmont was just a tremendous partner, working hand in hand with us to secure a design that works for both municipalities, access to properties that are not in our village. The next iteration, once we know what this project might look like and further improvements in the floodplain areas in St. Joe's Creek, will not only require extensive coordination with Westmont, but it will require coordination with the county, the state, and federal governments, because we're talking about FEMA floodplain regulations, et cetera. So we will continue to build on those relationships and figure out how we can all work together to address some pretty complex and technical floodplain issues.
The message there is we've sought those partnerships out with cooperation, and everybody around us has been responsive.
That's great.
And wanting to be helpful. So I would love to change that.
Yeah, absolutely not. Hopefully building on it.
We just going down the line? We should. I agree with all that has been said. Stormwater is one of the issues in our community, and I see no way that we could possibly not continue with this plan. Cost share programs. I think our residents value cost share programs more than we know, because they're not talked about too often. But that is something that I know residents appreciate. And with this coordination, I think the issue is there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and so we all work really well together, but it just takes some time because there's so many different entities involved in terms of getting everybody to coordinate. But I think we've established great relationships, and moving forward, that's something that will be successful. It just might take a little bit more time because there's so many people involved. So.
No need to belabor it. Yes. Let's go.
You got some direction there.
We have great direction here. We'll keep the council up to date as we move through some of these things. Some of these items will be coming to the council early next year as we get information and package it up for you.
Got some visitors with us. Anybody want to comment on this or weigh in at all?
I have some questions. What does recommended level of service actually mean in this context?
It means that of the on average 103 rain events that we can expect in any given year, 95% of them won't result in structural flooding in any part of the village. That the system itself will safely store and convey the runoff in that percentage of events.
And what amount of rain event does that allude to, I guess?
Okay. There's a couple ways to say this. One is the one I hesitate to use because it's that dreaded 100-year rain event system, which only Nan Newland actually understands. Well, so let's express it in terms of inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And you know what? Jim Talk emailed me this, and I forgot to look. Does anybody remember what it is?
It's about 3.5 to 4 inches of rain in 24 hours.
Is 95%?
Yep.
Yep.
How much of what is going on with all of this activity is undoing because of stuff that was done in the past, either because of lack of information with respect to floodplains or because of disdain for concern about stormwater impacts? Along the lines of what Rich was saying, in terms of there were swamps. I don't know if any thought was given at the time that, oh, maybe this is actually beneficial to leave it in place. How much of that is now part of all of these projects that either have been done or are anticipated to be done going forward?
So I don't know if anybody has quantified that in any particular area. I'm not aware of any quantification of the issue in the local area in those terms. But we do know, I paused there to see if anybody is.
Well, I could just add that what we think of as floodplain maps, FEMA didn't create floodplain maps until the late 70s, early 80s. So it's relatively new concept that's true of all communities in the state of Illinois. So the kind of statistical analysis of rain and frequency is relatively new. So all the development that occurred prior to that, there was no such thing as that's a floodplain and you can't build there, or that's a wetland. Those things weren't defined until later, relatively late. For a community like Downers Grove that had as much development before that, that's kind of what was the result.
Yeah, I want to just amplify what Nan is saying. To some degree, sort of all of the development activities over time have contributed in some way. We not just current, but people in the industry have learned so much over the years from the story that Rich told about just filling and paving over a wetland, to the evolution of floodplain regulations, to a better understanding of just stormwater management. The development pre-World War II doesn't really have much stormwater management at all. World War II, post-World War II to the 1980s has some, but nowhere near what would be required today, and really since the 80s till now. The restrictions and regulations of development and those types of things have gotten more strict and better at managing all aspects of stormwater. So I don't know the exact quantification, but a lot of it.
So the related follow-up question then is, given the awareness that exists now, and I don't know if it's directly connected here, but how are these ideas then factored into permission or not of the types of development that go forward?
So we've been talking tonight about this whole umbrella, if you will, of stormwater utility plan. This is on the infrastructure, operations and maintenance side of a stormwater system. There's a whole other branch of this discussion which has to do with development regulations. The good news is the council has been proactive on that issue as well, trying to make sure that development activities aren't contributing to problems that we have to solve on this side of the equation, and that we're not negatively impacting our neighbors with development. The most recent round of regulation changes was last year, and we're already seeing that those regulations have changed development patterns of new residential houses, and they appear to be working.
And then a last question, if you do have something that goes above the 95%, what will be experienced?
Some type of water pooling or...
2017 was our last storm of that magnitude, and that we had flooding. Streets were closed. We had some structural flooding.
Doesn't it also depend on the kind of rain? For instance, if you have this deluge where you're getting, 3 inches in 6 hours, as an example, versus it just rained for 3 days, it just never stopped raining, it's just this...
Intensity.
Yeah, and then the saturation of the ground.
So I guess in plain English, I guess that anytime you get a storm beyond these parameters, portions of the village system would be exceeded and inundated with stormwater runoff. Where it pools, where it goes, how deep it is, how fast it collects, how quickly it moves through is all dependent on the characteristics of the particular storm.
That, if I understand it, also takes into consideration winter storm events where the ground is frozen and not absorbing any water.
Correct.
Where it's pretty much all runoff.
The answer is some structural flooding will occur, and in almost any set of circumstances of work we would do now or 15 years from now, there still will be situations where we will experience that.
Well, I guess picking up on this 100-year flood thing that you are wanting to avoid, if 95% changes in terms of what is defined as that value, what's the consequence of that?
Right, I understand the concept. That's actually been one of the issues with the hydrographs, what's the English for that? That they may not be correct given climate changes, more intense rainfalls.
The storage and cost would go up exponentially from a 95% level to a 100% level. It's not just a straight line. It'd be an extremely larger number.
Is that getting at what you were asking?
If we're off in the sort of baseline assumptions, the 100-year flood event and the 95% storm, we'll just have a higher percentage of storms that exceed the capacity of the system. More and more storms will exceed the capacity of the system.
But you can get an exponential increase in cost for every percentage above 95%, right?
Exactly what Dan was pointing out, we think this is a really good balance between serving the community and being smart with the costs of investing in the system on the return.
Yeah, you're never going to be able to alleviate 100% of the flooding all of the time. But you just do the best you can for the most people, most of the time, without burdening everybody with those giant costs. I suppose is what it comes down to.
Anybody else? Okay.
And I think the measurements, I mean, it's not like the measurements are static either. So I think as the data comes out in the 95% rain event is going to be, that, in the years coming, maybe that changes some of the parameters as well. Because, these numbers are relatively new, these floodplain information, it's all relatively new information, 50 years or so. So you can't tell if it's a 100-year storm when you've only been around 50 years. And if we're in a climate change process now where we're getting more rain and more water, that's going to start skewing these numbers, and we'll see it. So then we have to adjust from there.
Okay. Anybody else? Council want to jump in?
Actually, it occurs to me I have one more
Sure.
awkward question.
Go
That
ahead.
ties into also the water. and maybe it's actually more related to the water, but I think it's relevant here as well. If you have the situation like with the water, where someone is a light user of water, from the equity standpoint, it strikes me that the system is more valuable, so to speak, to the person who's the heavier user. And the same thing would apply here, that the system as a whole is more valuable to the person who has more valuable property that potentially would be flooded. So part of, I guess what I'm trying to bring up is, in terms of the way you assess costs to cover this, the payment for maintenance, if I would like to hear a response to the idea that the person, that there should be some way to charge more to the person who has more at stake, if you will.
So much time and effort went into that when we crafted the approach to the stormwater utility fees, that very issue. The short answer is that it's built on a model that goes like this. All properties generate runoff, and therefore all properties benefit from the system as a whole. And the way to align what you pay with your general impact to the overall system was to create fees based on impervious area, which is a great proxy for runoff. The longer answer is I would direct you to the 2012-2013 Stormwater Utility Report and a series of videos that try to really get at and explain why it is that we built a fee system with those issues in mind.
Well, I understand the impervious surface, part of that, but I'm not sure that that addresses what I'm asking.
I think it's addressed in the reports.
That's why I made the connection to the water part of it as well. Because on the one hand, as was alluded to, if the United States currently has numbers on average that are significantly higher than what is feasible, then you have this issue that you're maintaining a system that's already in place because you had a certain notion about how much it was going to cost, but people are, I would suspect, likely to complain if they're reducing their water usage, but because you've got this big capital infrastructure in place just to deliver the water, that's why I make the connection to the idea that the person who's using more water is actually benefiting greater, at a greater rate than is the person who's using less water. And that's why I asked it that way, and it seems to me...
This one's a little flipped on its head. This is trying to make sure you don't have water rather than you do get water, and so it's where it's approached from a completely different side of the equation, which has to do with runoff generation.
No, I understand.
So that's how we ended up,
How much of the village surface is actually covered by streets, if I might?
You know what? We have all that information. I didn't prep on that line of questioning. I did prep on this, but I'd have to go back and refer to that same report I was referring you to.
I'll look at it. Thank you.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.